I saw a video where you talked a bit about your story as a child. I know that when you were 10 years old, you lost your mother. You're very open about how difficult that was for you, as surely it would be for anybody. Could you give us your story briefly, specifically as it relates to the way you felt about God? I'm speaking specifically about your childhood and high school years.
Sure, of course. Um, Losing a mother at 10 years old, let me jump, 2 years prior when my mother got sick when I was 8 years old. And then for the next 2 years, from the age of 8 till 10, having to travel around, to find my space within a world that's ever so changing. Mother was in clinics in New York, California, and Mexico. I remember in school, Rabbi Horowitz was there. Obviously, they had, pray for Chaya Mir Basef Halevi on the board. That affected me as a young child. Now, needing a space, needing a healthy outlet for that, where to place my emotions, like any other kid would. I say all the time, God sent me a tremendous gift called basketball that already at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was able to put all my talents into basketball and not into drinking, smoking, drugs. Putting all the efforts into basketball already in your fifth grade, I said I'm only playing with eighth graders, and then and having that as my healthy, or sometimes not even so healthy. I'd get upset if I was missing shots, four-letter words were coming out of my mouth. But that was a space where I was allowed to show my aggression, my passion. I was able to almost, escape like kids today. They scroll on social media. They, take, there's smoking pen or they're injecting things. God forbid, it's all as an escape from reality. Basketball was that escape for me, and it turned out to be almost a tremendous savior for me. And and the rest is history. I went to high school, and that's the rest of the story. But basketball was that space for me to allow me to process what I was feeling, and even better, yet, to allow myself not to feel what I was feeling and allow me to, just be me.
Well, obviously, that's very, very important. I'm sure Rabbi Horowitz gets a lot of credit for pushing that and allowing you
Yeah.
to really indulge in that. But I want to ask you about your emunah b'Hashem, your faith in God, which you're open about as something which you essentially dropped. You said, I'm not interested in God anymore. God killed my mother, so why would I want to have a relationship with him? Is that correct?
Not 100%. For me, it was a double whammy. I said, look, is there a God or is there no God? I'm not sure. But even if there is a God, I don't really care. I don't, I guess the kids say, I don't mess with him. I'm not there with him. I don't care. He took away my mother. This is my mother was 38 years old when she got sick, 40 when she passed away. She was a model in Europe and she becomes a model in Cuba. This is a reward, God? Like Zu Torah, Zu Schara, this is a reward? Now that's a real question. That's pain. That's real. I didn't run away from that question, and that I carried with that. So I had to channel those feelings into basketball, which I went to Mount Orthodox High School, into TABC, and I was able to into basketball, and then having trainers, and playing in the Jewish Olympics, and pushing myself in basketball to, hey, you don't deal with God now. You're not ready for it now. And of course, my father and other artists were smart enough and almost, ahead of the curve to say, hold up, let me work on this kid being healthy. He's a healthy individual, unconditional love, and we'll worry about his religious observance after.
Well, in terms of religious observance, so you said you just didn't want to deal with God at all, but were you keeping mitzvot? Were you putting on tefillin? Were
No,
you shomer
yeah,
Shabbos? What was happening?
no. For a while, I was not putting on tefillin. It wasn't keeping Shabbos. I took a lot of my mitzvah money and I bought a 70-inch flat screen TV, mounted it on my wall, and I say it openly. It was Olam Haba. It was heaven. I loved it. Friday night, my father would come home from shul, make kiddush, hamotzi. I'd eat some hamotzi. I'd say, Papa, I love you. And I went downstairs to watch, Friday night basketball. And my dad would say, he was very clear, this is not the way that mommy and I raised you, but I'd rather you be here under the auspices of my home, my love, my care, in my roof, than out at 7-Eleven, out in the streets, out involved in drinking, smoking drugs with that chevra, that get kicked out of their house, for not, shelling too, for not participating.
Okay, thank you for your
And,
honesty.
yeah, and of course, I'll just finish with that only because my father gave me unconditional love, and I truly felt that. Did I not need to search for love from an external place, which of course are what the kids are seeking and struggling and searching for today. But they don't feel love from parents. I'm just, an hour ago by lunch, a rabbi here came over to me, he said his kid is 19 years old, he stays up all night watching internet and he sleeps all day. How can I help you? You don't feel love from the parents. And he says he fights with the kid, argues with the kid. You don't feel the love. I felt that love. No matter what I did, religious observance or not, my dad was always there. And that
Okay.
saved me.
Thanks again for your honesty. We're going to come back to
Of
you, but I
course.
want to switch over to Alan for a moment and ask you what that was like for you. Here you are, you yourself are a religious parent dealing with the passing of your wife. And meanwhile, your child is rejecting the values that you brought him up, you and your wife, Aleha Shalom, brought him up to embody. What was that experience like?
Great question, Scott. And first, I have to start by giving a tremendous Hakor Sato to Rabbi Horowitz. He was my mentor, my guide, if you want to use the term, my Sherpa, climbing Mount Everest, you know, trying to go up something that I never thought in my life I'd have to go up. And he was the one that was there for me more than anybody else with his unconditional love and acceptance and counsel. Whenever I needed it, we came, we took walks. So he's on the screen here, and I just have to say that publicly, how much I owe to him.
Thank you. You were incredible because you were always open to listening. And I told you things that were counterintuitive, that made absolutely no sense. And, logically, which is, lay back, give him some love. And I've been telling this to parents for over 30 years that I'm not saying that my approach is right, but this approach, I've had this literally all my adult life. At the beginning, it was extremely non-mainstream, at the time. But if you do that, just be aware that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I always, Reb Scott, I always would tell this to parents all the years, because if you don't tell them that up front, then when that happens, it's so devastating. So it's like saying that tomorrow in New York it's gonna be minus 22. Okay, it comes, but at least you're prepared for it. So I would say your job is to give him stability. Someone pulled a chair out from under his life right now, and he just needs to get back and stable. Now, what happens, the reason it gets worse is because most kids don't show the parents exactly where they're up to religiously. So in Moshe's case, let's say he's watching TV, so he'd be grabbing a phone or a tablet or whatever it is and watching under his covers so nobody should see him. So dad doesn't know where he's up to. When you tell the kids to be honest, that it's okay, I love you, we'll work through this together. So if it's 1 to 10, 10 being the most intense rebellion against religion, so parents see 2, 3, and they're concerned, legitimately so. And then they come to someone like me and we say, just let him go. He needs to, and they test you sometimes to see if you're really going to stick with them. So it's going to get worse. It's going to get to 7, but that's part of the process.
Okay, Rabbi Yankee, I want to get back to that in a moment because that's such an important point and one of the essential points we have to deal with. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I first want to get back to before Alan heard that advice, what his experience was like when he first realized that Moshe Chaim was where he was religiously and emotionally. And then I want to hear more about how you dealt with it. So let's get back up just a little bit. So Alan, what was that like for you?
So I guess probably thinking back, it all started when we got the diagnosis that my wife was sick and that it was very serious. That was May 1st, 2007. So the kids were 8, 6, and 2. They were really young. And I very quickly, when I realized how serious it was, I took my religious hat off and put it to the side and said, these are my kids. These are our kids. Forget about religion for a second. What do they need as a human being? They need warmth. They need love, nurturing, stability, if possible, some sense of fun. A kid should enjoy. The kid's a kid, right? They're so young. Why burden them with this, why do we have to burden them with this tremendous, we don't know how it's going to turn out. It was 2 years she went through treatment at Hashem before she was lifted. Like, let me try to keep life as normal as possible, just as a human being, not being religious, not putting that completely aside. And if I'm sincere about it, and I thought about it before, being a Baal Tshuva myself, coming from that world and choosing the Torah lifestyle. Maybe for me, it was a little bit easier than somebody who grew up that, their parents and grandparents and great grandparents were extremely frum and so forth, because I knew what it was like that. And I was able to focus on just what do my children, each of the three children, need, and trying to give it to them.
I want to just clarify, you were Baal Tshuva before your kids were born, correct?
Correct. I
So
was
they
about
did-
to, I came to Aish Torah in 1995, got married in January of 98, and Moshe Chaim, our first child, was born in January of 99.
Okay. Now, Moshe Chaim, from your perspective, did you experience your father's love and warmth and acceptance in that way, such that when you were, I'm going to call it rebelling, I don't know if that's the right term, when you were rebelling against God, was it also against your dad, or was it really just against God?
I wouldn't even call rebellion against God. And I'll explain that in a second, but it was completely, my dad and I were 110% on the same page. And as I would struggle to find myself, and like I like to say, not off the derech, rather on their derech, on your journey, on your path, etc. My dad and I just got closer. It was hugs and kisses. He would come downstairs, tuck me in bed. I felt that unconditional love. And obviously that's what allowed me to come back to God, because obviously us as human beings, as men, as boys, we view our father, that's the closest, figure to God. That's the dugma, that's the mushal of God. If you feel judged, if you feel harped down upon, if you feel, hey, you're in a box from your father, then obviously God ain't no better. But if I view my father as someone who gives unconditional love, warmth, he's care. Yes, there's love, there's boundaries. Giving a child a candy at 10:30 at night is not unconditional love. That causes pain, that's hurtful. But there's unconditional love, real love. I love you for you. You're my son. I care about you. I'm there with you through this. Right? My dad has a mag in his fridge. He says, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. When I felt that he cares, he's there for me in this. It makes sense. Why should I believe in God? Why should I want to connect? I just lost a mother. And I'm a teenager, couple with that. When I felt that propelled me, to the graces.
And Alan, one of the most difficult things I find that people have, parents have, is this fine line between acceptance and approval. People often assume that accepting means approving. And one of the things that I've learned as a parent and as a teacher is that we are allowed and sometimes required to separate them. I can say that I accept you 100%. That does not mean I have to approve of everything that you do. Every parent has things that kids do that they may or may not like. But that doesn't mean we're able to say that I don't accept you for who you are, even if I don't approve of every choice you make, or I wouldn't have made that choice. How were you able to find the ability to separate those two things, which you obviously did?
Great question. And two thoughts jump to my mind. Number one is I tried to take the long-term approach, meaning my child is, again, because we have three kids, not just Moshe Chaim, he's the oldest. He was 8 when we got mommy's diagnosis. He was second grade, maybe third grade, something extremely young. I wasn't so concerned of what he was doing or not doing, at those ages. My goal was, okay, eventually, God willing, he's going to get married. I have to make sure between now, when he's 8, and whenever he gets married, that whatever he goes through, whatever Hashem puts us through, that I want him to get to a healthy, whole, balanced, Toradic place, ideally, and then he'll be ready to get married. And there are going to be ups and downs and bumps and bruises then. And so I was willing, almost, I guess, like stock market, you hold it for the long term. If it goes up, goes down, you have to know that's going to be the norm of how things go, and take the long term type of thing like that. So that's how I looked at it with all of our kids. And so I didn't, the acceptance and approval, I couldn't even imagine. I would look at my kids, honestly, Scott, all of them, and I'd say, I can't imagine the pain that each one must be going through. Thank God, my mother, even today in 2026, she's alive. She's 90 years old and going strong, right? So I can't imagine what it would be like. And I cried for my kids. And so who am I? Why am I going to put these restrictions and, especially when they're little kids, they should be having fun, growing, enjoying, exploring life. And now they lost their mother. And I know how close I've been to my mother my entire life and thankful. So that allowed me, I think, to it was really not an issue.
Rabbi Horowitz, I want to move to you and to what you said before. Now, we're going to get to that idea that you said it gets worse before it gets better. But even before that, it's a preliminary question. I once knew somebody who ran a Baal Tshuva, I'm going to call it broadly that, a Baal Tshuva type of seminary or yeshiva organization. I don't even know what to describe it here in the Beit Shemesh area. And I remember asking at one point about what their goal was in this school, in this institution. And these were for young adults who came from really problematic homes and broken homes. And I said, you try to work on them to become more religious. And he kind of chuckled and said, Halavai, we're not even thinking about that. All we want for them is just to be stable people who can live a good life. If they become religious, that's icing on the cake. That's the next step. Wonderful. But Halavai, they just grow up to be normal human beings who are able to be independent. And I'm wondering how you feel that as someone who's been a Rosh Yeshiva, as someone very, very clearly part of the Orthodox community. Do you agree that, so to speak, making them religious, again, to the degree we make anyone anything, but trying to get them to be religious is really a secondary concern when you're dealing with a young man or woman or a child who's gone through a trauma?
I had two roles here. I was I was working with Alan, which was heartbreaking sometimes, but inspiring at how open he was to listening and all of that. But I was also doing my best to give Moshe Chaim and Avi a comfortable space in our yeshiva. That I did so many little things to prep it for them, that they should, that they should be comfortable. And if they were to exhibit rebellious things against God or other things, that they should have a safe space to do that. There was so many different things that I would do, but I had to deal with Moshe that if he had something to say that might come off as a little disrespectful. Remember, Moshe? I said, come into my office. In my office, you can say anything you want. You can say you hate God, you're upset with God. You can say anything. But if you do it in the hallway, I'm going to have to say something. So please, let's do it quietly. And Moshe, you were great about it. And
I think we're gonna have to bring up the Malice in the Palace story.
absolutely.
Tell us about the Malice in the
Go
Palace
ahead.
story, Moshe Chaim.
The story was I was playing basketball one day and we were in the gym and obviously as kids, you joke with each other. I said to one of the kids, I remember which kid it was. Let's call him Jack. I said, Jack, I'm gonna kill you. Jack, I'm gonna kill you. Like we were, trash talking on the court, already at a young age, and he took it seriously that this guy Mo Proctor is gonna kill me. So he marched his way down to Rabbi Horowitz's office, and he obviously told him what just aspired. And Rabbi Horowitz called me in, and I'll never forget. He had a little, office in that bottom floor where they took out his iPad, and he typed up on YouTube. He typed up, Malice in the Palace. Ron Artest and Ben Wallace and those boys out in the stands, fighting with the fans. Throwing popcorn and beer and what was exactly his covenant? We're gonna have to ask Rabbi Horowitz in a second. But what I took from there was deep breath. It's okay. Look, these professionals also get angry, and it happens. And calm down. You'll be okay. Here's a safe space, and let's work through it.
The mom and dad called me and said he got a death threat.
The Malice in the Palace refers to a very notorious moment when various Indiana Pacers players climbed up into the stands and started pummeling the fans there. It was a crazy, terrible moment in NBA history. So that's what we're referring to. Rabbi Horowitz, does Moshe Chaim correctly interpret your kavana, your intention at that time?
Oh, absolutely. And typically, I had in the office, I had either one or two secretaries and a business manager that were there, and they would get used to my unusual way of dealing with things. What would be the typical response? Chaim, you're suspended or whatever. I'll give you this or that. Or tell him about his temper. And I just let the video talk. I didn't say a word, just like you remember. Wow, it's a long time ago. We just watched it together. I said, Moshe, what's your take? He says, yeah, you probably are telling me that I like basketball, and if I lose my temper, it could end up really badly for me. And I said, yeah, sure. I hope you'll go ahead and, join a league and really be good. He was incredible. I mean, and Moshe was a wonderful, um, incredible looking now at how much better he is in sports than the average people. He was like that as a young kid, and he always passed the ball. He was always gracious in winning and losing. That was an exception. He lost it, he lost it. And I remember my secretary coming over after Moshe left and said, Rabbi Herbert, that's something I didn't expect, but that's what he needed. And if I would have lectured to him, he would have started rolling his eyes. But the safe space really extended itself to the whole school. Very sadly, we lost, I hope I don't get emotional, we lost three mothers to cancer over a 12-year period. And each time, the kids were, of course, praying for the mom for months or years. Um, and God forbid, when they passed, um, I would go into the class and speak to them about what a shiva call looks like, what their friend is going through. And then a day or two before they returned to class, I would come into the class and write on the board. They said, Moshe is coming back on Tuesday. How should he react? And I would write, I'm going to learn extra special to zechus for my mother. Number two, I don't want to learn at all because I'm angry at God. Number three, please make me laugh. I was sad after sitting Shiva. Yeah, number four is I just want to cry. Just give me some space. Leave me alone. Treat me like everybody else. I deserve more space than other people. I went through all of them and I said, what's the right response? And the kids would vote. And then I'd say, here's my vote. And I would check off each of them and tell the kids it's perfectly normal. It's backed by research. It's backed by my anecdotal experiences. They're going to go through this whole range of emotions, sometimes within the same minute. And that's part of the grieving process. You know what your role is? Your role is to support him. It's not about you. It's not about how you feel. It's not about what you want to say. I told them that in a Shiva home, we don't talk. I would tell the kids what's going to go on in a Shiva home, but we don't talk before the mourner speaks. Why? Because he or she might not want to talk. And you might think you have the best thing to say, which might hurt them more. So your role is whether he increases his religious experience or decreases or gets angrier or more understanding, you are there to support him. And I even had with my staff, I had a staff meeting after each of these deaths, very sadly. I told the rabbi and the teachers they shouldn't grade the kid for prayer for a full month. I used to get a report card grade on that. I said, some kids might not even open a siddur, a prayer book. And that's their way of saying, hey, I told the staff, I said, look, guys, I don't know if the prayers written thousands of years ago speak to the kids, but I promise you, they've davened more for their friend's mom probably than they ever did in their life for anything else. And it seemed like God said no. So just be ready for that pushback. And if we do it school-wide, and in my mind, I tried to create that safe space in case the kids wind up slipping from religious practice. The kids all understood it already because they heard it from me, that would be a possible response.
Rabbi Yankee, I have two more questions for you before I go back to Alan and Moshe Chaim. My first question is, when someone like Moshe Chaim comes into the office and talks to you, as you describe it, in that safe space, saying how angry he is at God, or that he doesn't believe at God, he doesn't believe in God, or whatever else someone might say, or it might be not him, but one of his friends, anybody who's so distressed by this, how did you answer that? Because obviously, even seasoned theologians and philosophers and Rebbeim have a hard time with that question. How much more so when you're talking about kids? What would you say to them?
I would say either not respond, you know, a- or just let them know that it's okay to say that. Um, And sometimes I would respond like in different ways. One of the highlights of when I think of Moshe and his the wonderful time we spent together, he walked into my office. Um, he had just finished. I'm sorry. Moshe walked into my office with a Gemara in his hand, and there were parents, two new parents, a couple was there to register, to interview to see if they liked the school. And they're both sitting there, and Moshe walks in. It was so funny, Moshe. I remember it like it was yesterday. You looked at them and you looked at me because Moshe, even though he didn't want to admit it at the time, was a Talmud student. So he says, "You said I can tell you whatever you want in the office. What's with these two cats here?" Right? Is it the same rules? I'm telling you. You remember, Moshe? You looked at me like, huh? Yeah. And I went like this, like, be yourself. It's okay. This is safe. So he said, Rabbi, we were learning this Gemara, this Talmud, for 2.5 weeks. The rabbi said this and that and back and forth, and then they just answered the final conclusion. What did they waste my time for? I could have been playing basketball during those 2.5 weeks. That's what he said. Just
Feel the same way today.
I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said I feel the same way today because still playing basketball.
Just bottom line it. Listen,
Bottom line, it's the halacha.
So what would you respond? It's blasphemy. So I turned to the parents and I said, "You guys want to watch this? I got to talk to my student here. I can take him outside and you wait here for me, or you could see what this yeshiva is like and just watch." So they said, "Oh, here." So I said, "Sorry, Moshe, you're 800 years late. The Rambam, Maimonides, thought of that before you. He also bottom lined it." So he came in with this rebellious thing, and I turned it around and I said, Maimonides did what you did. He just said that, I don't know if he said that, but that's what he was thinking. And he wrote it. He says, you used a little off-colored word there, Moshe. He said, you whatever you're saying, you just said that to make me a mildly off-colored. No, he said, you're just saying that to make me feel good. So I took, give me the Gemara. I put down the footnotes to the Rambam. I said, go into the study hall of Beis Medrash. He came back, and I showed him exactly like where it is and what it says. And he walked back. So there were so many different ways I could have handled that. But that when a kid comes in and tells you that they hate God, they want to hear that you love them. That's what they really want to hear.
I think that's essential. The question isn't necessarily meant to be answered. They want the connection with you.
They're not saying that he didn't. That theological question wasn't keeping him up at night. He wanted to know that if he trashes or says something disparaging about Gemara learning, that I'm still going to be there for him, and that won't affect our relationship. I think it's always that they test you with things like this to see how you're going to do with it, and once they get comfortable, then.
Then my other question, Rabbi Horowitz, for you is on an institutional level, you're running a yeshiva, and as someone who's run a yeshiva, I know that as very difficult as this sounds, there's actually something to be said for the institution comes first, because that's the klal as opposed to the prat, the general as opposed to the particular. Yes, we have to care for every individual, but we can't let those individuals ruin it for everybody else. And therefore, that's why yeshivot sometimes have no choice but to expel a student. It's tragic, but at times understandable. How do you decide that Moshe Chaim or anybody else like him is saying things which might undermine the yeshiva, questioning things that normally we don't allow to be questioned, and yet you allowed him to stay? How do you make that decision amidst the fear that it might negatively impact every other student's experience?
It's a great question, of course, and it's always top of mind. And there may have been some parents that, and I was like this throughout the school. Moshe was unfortunately, it was facing much more difficult situation than most, but I would try to be tolerant with other children. And when I used to take my children, took them to their first baseball game, I would tell them, they'd see every hit in the air, every pop fly looked like a home run. They would start cheering, and if it was our team. And I used to tell the kids, watch the outfielders, don't watch the ball. Okay, look at the outfielders. If they're running to the fence, go crazy. If they're running to the back wall. But if they're staying like where they normally started or going in and out a little bit, it's nothing. It's a fly ball. I always felt that kids watch me to see how they should process this. And I'm sorry. So if Moshe had a misdeed or other kids who are going through stuff, the kids know, they all know what's going on. Most by and large, it's going on in other people's homes. And when they saw, they would look at me right away. When something happened in public, they would look at me to see how I'm going to respond. And if I would respond like something like, okay, Moshe, let's take this offline. Please come to my office in 10 minutes. Let's talk about it. And that was it. But the kids saw that I didn't admonish them. I never admonished a student in front of other kids. And they knew that they had my unconditional love. And the kids, I really feel that our students were very special because of that, because we created that space. And they knew. You think I had to tell the child, yeah, you think my students needed to know that some of these things were upsetting to me? If they know, just like Moshe knew that Alan was in pain seeing that. But this is what he needed from me. You worried about the other kids? The other kids will be more sensitive. The other kids will be, I always felt this way. We shared when the school was small, we shared space. I took a large former public school space. I had extra rooms. I rented it to a school for disabled kids. And two parents came to me and they said it might be upsetting because they had much more kids than we did. And the kids were walking in with wheelchairs and they were concerned that it's going to upset the tempo of the school, the upbeat rhythm. And I told them, I said, every one of my students, of your children, will be better fathers to your grandchildren if they hold the door open for a kid in a wheelchair. That's what I would tell them. Excuse me. I said, if they see this and they do this and they understand that not everybody's born perfect, they'll be much more compassionate. You don't have to worry about it being upbeat. And that was always my feeling. And I think Alan modeled that for his younger children when he was patient to Moshe Chaim.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Rabbi Horowitz. Moshe Chaim, I want to talk more about the way that basketball provided that grounding experience for you. I'll say from my own experience, one of the things I noticed as a teacher is that one of the most difficult situations with a kid is a lack of passion. In other words, I'd have kids who didn't necessarily care about learning, but they were passionate about sports or some other thing. And in my mind, I said, you know what? That's actually really good. That's a good meter to have, a good characteristic, because if nothing else, they still care about something. Later on, when they get older, we can then transfer the care about something that doesn't matter to something that does matter. But at least they have the characteristic of caring. Whereas the most upsetting situation was when someone just didn't care about anything. And then it was very difficult to try and inspire them because the concept of inspiration barely existed for them. So that's how I would take that. But I don't want to put words into your mouth. How was it for you having basketball? And obviously, you were very good. I did see a video of you playing, I think, more recently, and watching you dunk. So you obviously are very good at basketball. How was it for you to be good at something and to have that something which you could be passionate about?
100%, Scott. But before I answer that question, I just have to go back and something you guys, Rabbi Horowitz was speaking about a second ago. And that is the idea of asking questions and having space. I met with Rav Moshe Weinberger. I was blessed to meet with him, when I was in high school. And at this point in high school, 10th grade or so, not keeping Torah mitzvos, not davening. But again, I have a soul. I have something that's yearning, wants something deeper. I'm blessed, as a Rebbe Nation. I share my story a lot. I spoke in 2 seminaries on Thursday. I'm speaking again tomorrow night. So I share my story at 6 o'clock tonight. I'm sharing it. So I share this story a lot. And I mention a lot that the idea of, off the derech. So when I met with Rav Moshe Weinberger in high school, and we started speaking about the words, I said, davening is a bunch of Chinese, and I don't have time for it. I'm not interested in it. And we started speaking about the words off the derech. You know what he told me? Scott, he said, I hate the words off the derech. I said, why do you hate the words off the derech? He said, off the derech implies there was a way and the kid went off. He said, giving a kid a Gemara in 5th grade, telling him, learn this is not a derech. To teach a person what it means to be on the derech. So when it comes to, perhaps affecting, sharing, bothering, messing things up for other children. Look, in Asia, I don't think it's just a philosophy of Asia. Especially in 2026, you have to ask questions, because if you don't ask the questions, then they're all just building up and mounting up inside. And that's what causes robotic Judaism, motionless Judaism, emotionless Judaism. So just to speak about that, so even if I was asking questions, I think the opposite. I think it's healthy that people see it. So we don't live in Europe anymore. It's not a closed box. Ask your questions, because only when you ask Can you get answers? Okay. Going back to basketball. So basketball, yeah, the idea of having passion and being able to place it somewhere, being able to then eventually channel it towards, God and Avodas Hashem. That's exactly what it was. Already in ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, basketball seriously, trainers playing in the Maccabi games in Chile, and just having the idea of taking care of nutrition, exercise, sleep is important. I would take ice baths. If I wasn't playing basketball, I was watching basketball. The idea of having that, unfortunately, too many kids today. When I meet people and I say, "What are your hobbies?" Because it's very clear for us what mitzvahs are. Very clear what averos are. What about your hobbies? What are you good at? What's a safe space? What's something powerful, something a permissible pleasure that you can partake in that'll save you from the drinking, smoking, drugs? And unfortunately, too many kids in 2026 haven't found that hobby, that space of theirs that, hey, so unfortunately, even in my own share, you have 3 kids that are ripping vapes. And this is a modern Orthodox kids, which is it's less, less common to the FFB kid that's off and it's just that's normal. That's normal. It's normal. Ziz, right? Putting this stuff, normal. Weed, no, normal. Drink, no. You need to find something space. You need to find something healthy. You need to find something permissible, something that you're passionate about, that you can place your efforts in, that you can feel good about. That I'm good at this. That God has given me a talent and ability that I can bring out to the world through this vessel. And basketball was that for me. Throughout my journey, you can hear about this in other podcasts. I took a few years off from exercise and basketball stuff. And I'm proud to say, over the last, couple of years, very back into basketball, into exercise, and being able to, be a positive inspiration to today's youth.
Okay, that's great. Alan, let me ask you. I've heard Rabbi Horowitz describe the advice that he gave you, but I'd like to hear you describe what you heard. When Rabbi Horowitz talked to you about Moshe Chaim and your other kids, can you tell me what that advice sounded like to you? What was he saying to you at the time?
One story in particular, I think probably typifies everything. We were still on the point of mommy was being treated. So the kids were very young. We were flying to Los Angeles. And I remember on the plane, each seat had like a little video monitor. And each of the kids, of course, wanted to watch like cartoons or sports or something like that. And my wife, Alaa Shalom, was very frum. And she was like, no, I don't want the kids watching cartoons. I don't want the kids watching sports. And so I was thinking like, yeah, but it's a long flight to LA, and it keeps them, their attention focused, and, it doesn't seem so bad. And so I said, okay, I'll call Rabbi Horowitz afterwards. And I remember calling Rabbi Horowitz, and I told him and he was like, let him watch the cartoon. Let him watch the basketball game. It's okay. And that began, he was teaching me that, and how fortunate am I just listening to how many Rosh Hashivas use the words that he just used a few minutes ago, like unconditional love. As a father can use, but he is a Rosh Hashiva. To use the word, you have to give your students unconditional love and support. It's unbelievable. I feel even more privileged that we were Zocha to have him for our boys for all those years way back when. It was tremendous. So he really taught me that you have to just take a step back, let your kids be normal. You're going to have to drop your quote unquote religious standards somewhat, so that you're going to have to find that balance so that the kids can be happy and healthy and emotionally balanced.
Just to frame it for the people who are watching, let's make it not about cartoons, okay? Let's talk about the kids playing basketball on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, in their driveway, in a small, and not small, but how many families were in Park Avenue Estates?
Yeah.
50, 100?
Yeah.
So you got this closed, development, and the 2 kids are playing without a kippah, without a yarmulke on Shabbos afternoon, while everybody's walking back and forth to shul. That's what it's like. Cartoons is a little one. And, Alan said, because it was fascinating. You said, Alan, earlier, that because you weren't born religious, you were able to compartmentalize that a little bit better, that the kids aren't religiously observant because you grew up with you could make the argument the other way, that you sacrificed so much for religion, and here the kids are not only watching a movie in their room, but on the court. Do you remember when you wanted to move? Do you remember that?
Absolutely. Passaic. I asked you about Passaic.
May
Yeah,
I discuss it? May I
sure,
say?
of course.
So Alan was very seriously thinking of moving because, like he said, it's he just wanted to get to a different
Well,
place.
but also the kids were going, the boys were starting to go to high school in TABC and TNEC.
That's true, right?
So
You wanted to be
Passaic was
closer,
closer, and
right?
Tova was maybe going to go to high school in a school in Passaic. So,
Correct. I
it was
forgot
pretty
about that.
logical.
Thank
It would be
you.
a lot closer.
But what did I tell you? You remember?
I absolutely remember. You said, if you said, let me ask you a question. When they play basketball on Shabbos with no yarmulke, you know, did the community members accept them and acknowledge them, and they're used to it and so forth, because it'd been a number of years by then? And I said, absolutely, they feel very comfortable. And he said, if you move to Passaic, you're going to be the new family. It's a very black and white community. They're wonderful people in Passaic, wonderful. But now all of a sudden your kids want to play basketball on Shabbos in the driveway in Passaic, which is really a very yeshivish community, again, a wonderful community. They're all of a sudden your family is going to be the new family that I don't know if I want my kids to play with that family, because look, their kids are playing basketball in the driveway on Shabbos, no yarmulkes. He said, stay in Muncie. You said stay in Muncie. It was tremendous advice.
And what I think any parents who are watching, number one recommendation is study Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's guided my philosophy in education for 45 years. Because he talks about 5 levels that the levels are sequential. The lowest level is physical needs. If then feeling safe, then love, relationships, family, then self-esteem, and then self-actualization, which to grow to be all you could be. And I think that if you think about Maslow like that, it's impossible almost for children who just lost a parent to self-actualize, which is everything we want from them: become religious, study, do well in school. That you just yanked out the stability in their lives. So parents, unfortunately, when they start disciplining the kids, and I'm not judging anyone, of course, we try to do nothing in life prepares someone to parent a child that's going through trauma, through loss like that. But the normal reaction is we express a displeasure, even in a positive, even in a nice way. You're pulling that stability out also. Like my dad's really upset about this. So it's actually, you're undermining what you need most, which is building up those lower levels. And when you put those levels in place, then they can start building. That takes time. That's why it gets worse before it gets better. But what I told you then, I said, think about Maslow. They have Maslow in their neighborhood. They have it right now. They have people who love them. I think the religious level is probably the same in Muncie, in Park Avenue as Passaic. It was everybody that walked by was, looking and thinking or whatever, but they waved. How are you, Moshe? How you doing? Avi, whatever. That means the neighborhood is providing you with this. You move out of there, you're yanking that away.
Yeah. Now, Alan, in your experience, how was it that you took this advice and discarded, for example, the advice of other people? It could be you only got advice from Rabbi Horowitz. But in my own experience, I often ask advice from numerous different people, rabbis or other people. I'm guessing that other people may have given you different advice. So first of all, did you get different and conflicting advice? And how did you decide to move forward with this much more accepting type of advice rather than something else?
Great question. I probably did, thinking back again, this was a lot of years ago, but I probably did ask some other rebbeim and got maybe slightly different advice. However, Rabbi Horowitz, he's on the screen here, but in my mind, he's a gadol in this. He is mamish a gadol in this. Rav Chaim Kanievsky's Zatzal was a gadol in learning. In this inyan of dealing with children who are going through difficult times and something, I can't think of somebody who'd be better. So, he's going to be the person that I'm going to listen to. And it made it very easy to discard the other people's advice who don't have the expertise and the sense of caring and didn't know my kids. We were zocha that my boys were students at his Yeshiva, it's now called Yeshiva Katana, or Ruvain was called Darchei Noam back then. So he knew my kids, he knew the family, he knew my wife. He has all this experience. He's the one I'm going to listen to.
And
And
was
he
it difficult
would
when
call me
And I would call you.
after one of those sessions. I knew for sure. I never asked you. There's a lot we're finding out about each other now. You would call me randomly, 6:30 at night on a Tuesday. Say, Rebbe Horowitz, you sure this is the right thing? You sure I should be doing this? And I knew for sure. I was so polite. I didn't say, okay, who'd you talk to now? And of course, I was happy that he got advice from other people. I didn't, but what you would call me like, you sure this is the right thing to do? You sure? Or he'd come over to the, if it was really serious, he'd come over to the house. We'd walk around for a couple of miles, and you stuck with your North Star. And the truth is, look, different people have different. I'm not saying that other opinions aren't valid. I'm not saying I have all the answers. Based on my experiences, this is what I thought was right. But parents, it takes such a strong stomach to do what you know in your heart is right. I often tell parents, when parents tell me that they're thinking of doing this, the kids are wearing different clothing than I said, what would you do if you were on a farm all by yourself? If you were on a farm and you had to make a decision if your kids should play ball, let them play ball on Shabbat, or let them dress in a rebellious way or other things like that, would you do the same thing, or would you be less concerned? And if it's only about the neighbors, I don't think I ever told this to you, Alan, because you were all in, but I would tell parents very gently that I found over the years that people who make a fuss about little things, smaller things, because they're embarrassed of the neighbors, you get much more embarrassed, God forbid, about much bigger things later on. You won this little battle, you won the other thing, you got them to do what you wanted, but that's churning and it's going to bite you much, much harder later on. You're much better if they do the rebellion when they're younger and there are smaller issues, and then let them go. And we said about the sports, I would often tell Alan, I said, if you want him to stay off drugs, just make sure that he's totally engrossed in sports, because he's Lamborghini. I smiled when you
Yes,
said,
sir.
Moshe, could you tell Rob Scott what you said about the Lamborghini?
About the sour stick? Is that what you're referring to?
No, yeah, about the
Well, yeah, no,
not pouring Coke into your
yeah, no, for sure. I'd often say, even when I wasn't religious, I would say, my body's a Lambo. I ain't gonna put that garbage, that diesel fuel in my Lambo. And I'll give you a story to back it up. I was in a summer camp, sleepaway camp, but again, not religious at the time. But a kid came over with a sour stick. I was in 10th grade, 11th grade. He's like, Mo, you want a sour stick? Appreciate it. Took the sour stick, and I chucked it. Said, get that garbage out of here. So my body's a Lambo. I don't put that diesel fuel in my. You put diesel fuel in your Lamborghini, it's not going to run properly. I only put premium unleaded fuel in you. So when you that's exactly what you're saying. When you have that tunnel vision, wow, nice. LeBron can take care of his body, but Mo Proctor can't take care of his body. And when you're focused, that saves you from a lot of the garbage that's outside.
Well, Moshe Chaim, let me get back to you, because obviously now you said you're teaching at Aish Torah. You've obviously come a long way religiously since those days when you were putting on tefillin and you were playing basketball on Shabbos in your driveway. What happened that you are where you are now? Because the reason I'm asking isn't so much for a faith renewed story, but as a encouragement for parents, because first, as Rabbi Horowitz said, it gets worse before it gets better. So I want to hear about, what was that moment when it started to get better, and how did that occur in your life?
Do I have 1 minute, 3 minutes, or 5 minutes?
Take whatever you'd like.
All right. So when I went to high school, 9th, 10th, 11th grade was just super focused on basketball, my skills, playing in the Jewish Olympic Games, a phenomenal experience that my father actually came and joined me with. And then at the end of 11th grade, I had an experience in summer camp. We're not going to mention the camp, but experience in summer camp was the first time I was forced to play basketball. And I said, wait a second, this basketball is fun, but it was never something I was forced externally to play. I took a pen and I wrote on my hand, do more of what makes you happy. Basketball's not making me happy. I got to do something that makes me happy. I paused basketball. I started focusing, exercising, nutrition. Now, why I say this is I was so turned off to basketball. In 12th grade, senior year of high school, I almost didn't want to play in the team. But they said, Mo, you're the best in the team. You got to play in the team. Make a long story short, I played in the team. But something already within me said, wait, basketball's fun. there's got to be something more to life than basketball, right? Like my father and his story, traveling, from 21 to 30, traveling around the, United States after war and then Fortune 500 company and the Golden State Warriors and money's great. There's got to be more to life than making money. For me, basketball's great. I love it. There's got to be more to life than making money. And might I mention, even when I was playing basketball, I was successful, but I wasn't always happy. When I was missing shots, four-letter words were coming out of my mouth. And Sunday mornings, before, America, you watch football on Sunday, which starts at 1 o'clock. I'd wake up 10, 11 a.m. I would turn on a Catholic preacher on TV who gave me inspiration to get in touch with my soul, to get in touch with God, that I was searching. But I couldn't come to grips with the fact that, hey, if there's a God, there's a source, an infinite power, how could he take away my mother? Then I started learning about Amunah, and that, Rav Shalom Arushkar and Amunah and David Ashir living Amunah, that perhaps there's a creator of the world who loves you infinitely, more than you can ever imagine. And why and yes, you don't understand October 7th and the Holocaust. And thank God the creator of the world's IQ level is higher than Mo Proctor's IQ level. And etc. And I started turning in this sugya, in this topic, and I said, wait a second, I got, like a normal Modoc scale, I got to come to Gap, got to come to Israel. Came, for Shana Aleph, first year in Aish, in Gesher. And I was already from day one, I was into it. I got to find out more. I really got to touch with my soul, Hasidic thought. Stayed a second year, got into Gemara, Halacha, because again, my nature is passion. Some would call it extreme. I call it passion. That, if I want something relentless, I'm going to get it. Stayed 1 year, stayed 2 years, stayed a third year in Aish. And at this point, I was very, as we call it, I was very flipped out. I hate the word flip out, because I preach flip in. People should flip in, but I flipped out entirely, which is, my past and basketball. The names LeBron and Kobe I deleted from my mind. I speak about this openly, which I completely recommend against this, but this is what I did. Again, it's for a longer conversation, but stayed a third year in Aish, then I went on to the Mir, and I can, pursue the higher learning of education, and thank God I got married, and I've been married for 3.5 years now, thank God. And about 2 years ago, we're in America having my son, and it was just constant. Wait a second, God makes no failures. There's no mistakes, and if you went through what you went through, it's lechatchila, it's the best. And Hashem put you through this in order to inspire and to help and connect with people, the Jewish youth that are so struggling. Because look, I'm the youngest one on this podcast by far, probably by 30 years at least. And I'm going to speak from a youth perspective. The Jewish youth, I'm 27. We have a hard time looking up to that rabbi with the white beard, if at all. Right? I was speaking on chops with some kids. That big gadol, where picture of the gadol learning in front of Gemara, does virtually nothing. Even to myself, I'm going to be candid. I have a social media page. I say everything up the way it is. I'm not hiding it. Even myself, that virtually does nothing. Doesn't inspire. We're 26. We have titles. We're involved in content. We're on the social media. We people are chasing women. There's a lot going on in this. So I said, hey, I want to be able to relate to the youth that are struggling through this, have that balance, and 1 foot being connected to Masorah Jewish wisdom. And from the second side, being able to relate to this youth, this figure who's struggling to find himself in 2026. And that's, so being here at Aish, at Aish, but Aish is just the ground, putting on social media and all the stuff we do, trying to inspire and to relate and teach people. Look, I always joke, you say the Amish folk, right, in Pennsylvania, we can have to fact check this, but what I heard growing up is that when the kid's 18, the parents give him money. They say, hey, him or her, go around, travel around America, travel around the world. You have an entire year to discover. If after this year you want to come back and join us in Amish Town, great, we want you here. And they hope they'll come back after seeing the big bad world out there. But if you want to go free and you want to live in the normal world, this is the time. Go. Now, we'd say halavai by Yidden. The Jewish, kids 16, 17, 18 can have that year off to choose it. Whether we like it or not, Reb Scott and Reb Horowitz and my dad, kids are doing that. That's what's going down. And they're starting from 8 to 10 to 12 to 16, 18, 22. The kid's taking that year plus. Do I want this? Am I in? Am I out? Do I believe in God? Or do I want this religious? So my dad told me, white shirt, black hat. Who says I'm down for it? Who says God knows me? Who says God's true? Maybe it's fake. Maybe it's cute ideas. And God experienced that. And the only people, and I'll finish my saying over the only people that can make it in the end of generations when Mashiach will come, and this is whether it gets 8 or he's 80, if you build a personal relationship with God, close the Sefer, close the Siddur, and open up to God in your own words. I'm not running away from my struggle. I'm not running away from my trauma. I'm embracing it. I embrace it. It's what makes me me. And then when I get to a healthy space, I'll be able to use those experiences to be able to impact.
Then let me ask you one last question, Moshe Chaim. When you talk to God about why he took your mother, what is that experience like?
Yeah, the experience is God. I'm in pain. I'm frustrated. I don't understand why. The same way I don't understand why the Holocaust happened, the same way I don't understand why October 7th happened. And you know who asked God this question? Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, he said, God, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things to good people? You know what God said? He said, God, Moses, I love you. You're my chosen one. You won't be able to understand the answer. That's why I'm not going to share it with you. And the way I explain like this, if you're giving a 45-minute math class with Scott, and I walk in 30 minutes late, and I walk in and the board is filled with problems, filled with math problems. And I walk in 30 minutes late and they say, teacher, Scott, question. And you say, Moshe Chaim, I appreciate you pulling up the class. Thank you for coming. But you walked in 30 minutes late, you're not going to understand the math class. If you were here at the beginning, you would understand. So we come to God in year 2026, 5786 in the Jewish calendar. God, I got questions, pain, suffering, confusion, man's a woman, a woman's a man, a lot of stuff comes. And God says, yes, there's pain and struggling, and you have your questions. Those questions are real and valid. But you know what? You weren't before, and you weren't here after. I was here, am here, and I'll always be here. And I take solace, I take comfort in the fact that the creator of the world's level, so to speak, is higher than my IQ. The same way I don't understand quantum physics, I don't understand why bad things happen to good people and vice versa. But I take comfort. I go to sleep knowing that God Almighty is running the show and he loves me unconditionally. And that's the only way I think a person can go through challenges, be able to, I ask all the questions. And as great as my mind will allow me to understand, I'm going to try to understand. But there's some point I step back, he's running the show. He's running the show. Trust him, believe in him, connect to him.
Okay, Moshe Chaim, thank you very much. As we near our conclusion, Alan, let me ask you for a final word. Advice to parents who may be listening, whose children are not following along the path that they would have chosen for that child. What would you say to them, sort of as a concluding idea? What are the most important things that you've learned in this process about the way that one should parent?
Great question. So two thoughts jump to my mind, Scott. One may seem like a little bit from left field, but I think it was important. These days, alcohol is so accessible to kids. Every single kiddush, bar mitzvah, chasana, vort, whatever, there's alcohol everywhere. And if kids get started with alcohol, I once spoke to Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twersky about this, and he said, alcohol is like a gateway drug to a lot of worse things. So one of the things that I did, this is not specifically what you asked me, but I think it's important to share what I did. I made a conscious decision very, very early on. I didn't want alcohol in our home. Most from homes you go to, they have a nice selection of scotches and so forth. To the best of my knowledge, I virtually never made kiddush on wine the entire time. I only made it on grape juice. I didn't even want wine there because, parents give like the kid a little bit of wine. And some people say, like, I remember speaking to Rabbi Horowitz. He said, it's better to give a little proactive, it's an inoculation sometimes. They could give them a little bit at home and then they don't want to have a tie to try it outside. I only made it on grape juice. So there was no wine, there was no alcohol in the house, accessible, visible to the kids like that. That's just on a side note. And then I think a simple sort of klal gadol that I had with my kids over the years when they wanted to do things. Abba, can I go on this trip? Abba, can I go to my friend's house? Abba, can I go to Hershey Park with this person? Abba, can I do this? Can I do that? As long as it was within reason, I had two rules. And Moshe will smile when I say these two rules. And it was for all three of my kids. I would think about it and I'd say, okay. And I'd say to the kids, be safe and have fun. That was it. Be safe and have fun. Safety has to come first in all the forms that safety takes, right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, financial safety. Be safe, but you should have fun. I want you to be normal. I want you to have a good time. I want you to enjoy. Because the world, there's so many taivas out there, so many things, so many opportunities for kids to get pulled away from Torah that if they're not enjoying, they're going to get pulled to something else. So be safe and have fun. If I had one sentence to say, it would be unconditional love, hugs and kisses until they don't want them anymore, and be safe and have fun.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And Rabbi Horowitz, let me conclude with you. And I'd like to ask you two things as a matter of concluding. First of all, again, like I asked Alan, as I asked Alan, could you give a summary of what you think is important for parents to hear now, parents who are dealing with kids who are not following in the path that they want? But my second question is more specific. For you as a teacher, as a Rosh Hashiva, as someone who talks to both kids and parents, are there times that you might tell the child something different than you tell the parents, not because you're trying to play them off each other, but because the advice for one is not necessarily the advice for the other? I once had a Rosh Hashiva who gave me some advice about a certain person, and he said, you should know, if that other person comes to me, though, I'm only going to look at what's good for him, and I might tell him something different because I'm concerned about the person who's facing me right now. So I'm curious if that's something you've ever dealt with.
So my advice to parents first would be to read up whatever's going on. Look, today you can AI or Google stuff and really learn a lot. Try to know what you don't know. Try to get information from any source you can that you feel works for you. Some people will give you advice. It has to speak to you. I think all parents should process this and say, is this the right advice for me? Do I feel comfortable that this is the right thing to do? And let your children know that you'll always be with them, that you're doing this together, and think of it as a shared journey. And I think that challenging experience that kids face sometimes make them really extraordinary adults. There's Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it. It's called Eminent Orphans. 14 of the 46 American presidents lost a parent before the age of 10. And people who are, on the other hand, children who lost a parent are 2.5 times more likely to be in jail. I'm talking about research-based studies. So realize that a tragedy, a difficulty, a kid with a learning disability, and anything where children don't fit into this construct we call school, sets them up either for a lot of challenge or possibility of really becoming an extraordinary adult. And to try to believe in your kids and to try to believe in yourself. It is so disorienting going through something like this as a parent. That's not what they taught you in school. That's not what they said is gonna happen, But life happens, and try to ride the waves, learn as much as you can, but follow your gut. And if your gut is that I'm gonna stay with my kid, I think that's the best advice that I could give you, is to follow that North Star, as difficult as it is, to try to be with your kids. Of course, you need to discipline them from time to time. You need to do different types of things to encourage your children to do well, but believe in them and try to believe in yourself.
Okay. And how about that other question I asked you about giving different advice to parents and to children, or even to two different individuals? Is that something you believe in, or something with which you disagree?
Well, can you just give me an example of what you mean?
I'll give you an example in the realm
Please.
of education. I was thinking, for example, one time of hiring a particular person and starting a new program in my yeshiva. So my partner and I in the yeshiva went to a certain Rosh Yeshiva, and he said, what problem are you trying to solve? I don't think this would help you out. And he told us, however, if that guy comes to me and says, should I take the job, and encourage them to give it to me, I might say something very different, because from his perspective, it's a great deal. It's a great job. So I'm wondering if that sometimes happens to you, as as a balaita, somebody who gives out advice, the need to look at every individual facing you. I have to tell you what's right. My job isn't to fix the situation. My job is to tell you, the person in my office right now, what's best for you. Sometimes that means, however, that two people who are on opposite sides might get different advice because each one needs something different. I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to help you.
Well, I would think that's the only thing to do, because when somebody comes to you, then that person is I always feel, let me start again. When someone comes to me for advice, I always feel that I have to treat them like my child, like my own child. And at that moment, it's not decisions that are made for the community or on behalf of God. I have to do what would I do with my own child? And it's almost inevitable that people will come from different aspects of the situation, and they might, you might have to you have to give them advice. If I told Alan, I encouraged Alan to let the kids play basketball on Shabbos. Let's say a neighbor comes to me and says, I went over and I gave Moshe a hug on Shabbos while he was playing ball, but my 13-year-old kid's looking at me and said, "Oh, that's an easy way to a hug." Maybe I should play basketball on Shabbos too. Should I pull back a little bit? Maybe that father needs to. And so every person, the same situation has so many different people that are affected by it. And sometimes that advice, if someone tells me, let's say, I'm okay with it, or even a parent says, I'm okay with it, but my spouse isn't, or I'm okay with it, but my parents are saying things. It's so complicated. Very often I do get people on different ends of the same situation, but I think my responsibility is to treat them as I would my own child, as I would a family member of my own.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you joining me today. This was an important conversation, and hopefully we'll do some good as people listen and get some new ideas about how they should deal with some very difficult and not easy situations. So Alan Proctor, Moshe Chaim Proctor, and Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Very much, Scott. My pleasure.